Hi, everybody. As you can tell from the information we've covered so far, risk management is a huge part of information security. So let's go ahead and take a closer look at some of the processes of the risk management lifecycle. All right, so what are the steps of the risk management lifecycle? We start by identifying risks and determining where threats meet vulnerability. Then we assess the risks. We use qualitative or quantitative analysis to determine what potential is for loss. So in order to do that, we're going to look at the probability of the risk event and multiply that times its impact. This gives us a value of the risk so we can prioritize it. Then we mitigate the risks. The value of the risk that we assessed in step 2 will drive our mitigation strategy. If it's a high probability, high impact risk, we'll have a very active strategy. If it's a low probability, low impact risk, we'll probably have a passive strategy. Our options for mitigating risk are by reducing, transferring, or accepting risk. And then we monitor the risks, because we know we can't eliminate risks completely. So we must continue to monitor. If someone asks, when are you done with risk management? The answer is never, because you have to continue to monitor for risks. All right, so first step, risk identification. There are 3 parts to risk identification we have. Identify assets, identify threats, identify vulnerabilities. Frequently, when we talk about assets in information security, we mean data. So we have to identify the data we want to protect and the value of the data. Then the next part is to ask, what are the threats? Again, threats are those elements that can exploit weaknesses or vulnerabilities. So you have to identify the vulnerabilities. Now, one of the ways we can identify risk is to use threat modeling. STRIDE is a common threat model that we'll look at in a second. Another type of threat model is use-misuse cases. You could also include risk scenarios as a type of threat model. The STRIDE threat model is a very common model that is used with software development. It includes 6 primary security threats and the mitigation strategies for each of those threats. The first letter of each threat spells the word STRIDE. Spoofing is the S in STRIDE, and it means impersonation. It could be like IP address spoofing, caller ID spoofing, MAC address spoofing, or email spoofing. The best way to mitigate against spoofing is strong authentication, which is proving your identity. Usually, we want to use multiple factors of authentication. This typically includes asking you for something you know, something you have, and something you are. And recently, we've added somewhere you are, using GPS. And we've also added something you do. This could be like patterns that you swipe on your smartphone, and so forth. Tampering is the next threat, and it's the T in STRIDE. This involves some sort of modification. The best way to mitigate against this threat is through a form of integrity verification, such as message digests. Another word for message digest is a hash. We'll talk more about that in just a bit. Another older mitigation strategy is CRCs, cyclic redundancy checks. And another strategy is checksums. Repudiation is the next threat in this model, and it's the R in STRIDE. This means that a sender of an email disputes that they sent the message. Or they could say that they sent the message, but it was tampered with in transit. The mitigation strategy is non-repudiation. This means using something that provides authenticity and integrity, such as a digital signature and keys. We'll talk more about this in our section on cryptography. Information disclosure is the I in STRIDE. This means the disclosure of sensitive information. We mitigate this through confidentiality and encryption. Denial of service is the next threat, and this is the D in STRIDE. Denial of service attacks are about rendering a service or server unavailable. This might be where you flood a server with illegitimate reasons, so that it is so busy dealing with those requests, it can't handle legitimate requests. Another example is where an attacker uses unsuspecting networks that we refer to as botnets or zombies to launch a much larger scale attack on the target. The mitigation strategy for this type of threat is high availability, redundancy, and fault tolerance. So if web server 1 is attacked, that's okay, because web server 2 can handle this remaining traffic. Escalation of privilege is the E in STRIDE. This threat means an attacker accesses a system as a regular user and escalates his privileges so that way he has an admin account, for example, and can give more permissions. The mitigation strategy for this is to have strong authorization measures. So to recap, STRIDE is a great start to threat modeling. It looks at 6 of the most common threats and how to mitigate them.